Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Tech Insights. My name is Shelly Calhoun-Jones, and I'm a principal technologist here at Cohesity. Today, we're joined by Brian from BigID. Brian, would you like to do an introduction?
Thanks for having me, Shelly. I've been looking forward to this talk. My name is Brian Wuollet. I'm the Vice President of Partner Success at BigID, which is a data security and compliance solution that uses data classification as a foundational element to finding a business's crown jewels and sensitive data across their data estate. Thanks again for having me, Shelly.
No, it's a pleasure having you, sir. So in this episode, we're going to take a look at data classification and how we can leverage it for building out a strong foundation for our security and business operations. In particular, we're going to talk about how we can use it for identifying servers that are hosting sensitive data and how we can use this information for building out our security policies to help minimize the potential impact of a data breach. So let's go ahead and jump into the material. Brian, how do you define data classification and why it's so important for businesses?
Data classification is that categorization of data based on the context surrounding the data. Context is a really important word in that sentence, which we'll come back to throughout this conversation. Data can be classified through human interaction with the data, such as placing a tag on a document, for example, to classifying the information based on a company policy or some sort of business schema. More of an old school technique to implement data classification throughout an organization. The more forward-thinking organizations are leveraging technologies such as BigID, where the system is performing that classification on the data in an automated and continuous manner, completely removing that human from that equation. This type of approach not only increases the accuracy of the classification, but also increases the coverage a business can attain. Data classification is important for a number of reasons, but I'll name a few. It's a foundational element of creating that business's cybersecurity strategy. That strategy starts with understanding the types of data the organization has under its ownership. By understanding the types of data, such as protected health information, a business's crown jewels, such as intellectual property or credit card information, an organization can now determine the right level of protection for the data, the appropriate controls to be put in place to protect the data, and how the business can take that valuable data to drive initiatives around data commercialization, AI, BI, you name it. Data classification helps establish the foundation. You have to know what data you have in order to avoid creating cracks in that foundation. Based on your background, Shelly, why is data classification, scanning, and discovery so important to a business?
Yeah, I used to work with large companies as a security SME. And one of the challenges that my customers ran into is just understanding the sheer topology of their environment, especially when dealing with like a virus outbreak. And so, from the security side, granted, you know that you're getting notifications maybe from a particular network range, maybe from a particular segment of your environment, but sometimes it can be challenging understanding exactly what that server is getting used for. In particular, what kind of server is it? Is it a database server? Is it an AD server? Is it hosting a mission critical workload? And so, granted, there are ways that you can go about delineating, the type of servers within your environment using logging or going in and performing periodic health checks. But especially if you're new to the company or maybe you're working with this particular organization as a managed service provider, understanding the data that it's hosting is important to make sure that you have robust security in place for your environment. So, deploying a more stringent security policy can help minimize, the overall damage, but, data is always changing. It's constantly moving throughout the network. And, especially if you are dealing with advanced persistent threats where you have an attacker trying to move laterally, through the network, it's really important to, classify the data so that way you can have that security trickle down to your servers. So, Brian, what are some of the different factors that can help, drive accuracy of these data classification scans? Do you have any suggestions around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Accuracy is probably the most important aspect of data classification. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the phrase garbage in and garbage out. If you classify data incorrectly, you may actually be increasing the risk of breach or exposure to compliance regulations. Some of the factors that help increase the accuracy of the classification are the context of the data. If your data classification approach doesn't take into consideration the context around the identified data type, you have created a large number of false positives and an inordinate amount of work for your business that will need to be addressed. You just introduced a new cost to the business that now needs to be paid down. As an example, how do you know the difference between the place, Paris, Texas, and the person, Paris Hilton? You have to be able to understand the other words or values around Paris. There could be other words like location or place, or maybe even a zip code surrounding the word. By taking into consideration the context around Paris, we can help ensure the accuracy of the classification is 100%. Another way to increase the accuracy of the data classification is to use what we call exclusion lists. The easiest way to deal with a correct match that creates false positives is to exclude it. This will, of course, create false negatives, although in some cases it's worth it. For example, you may have a value with 8 5s in a row, which is a valid US driver's license number, but it's much more likely that that string of 8 5s in a row isn't a US driver's license number. So we can make the US driver license number catch all 8-digit numbers, except for cases when the whole string is made up of a single digit. So the exclusion list helps to suppress irrelevant, test, or out-of-scope values that would otherwise match the classifier. Another technique that could be used to help increase the accuracy is what we call support terms. This is a method of reducing false positives by returning a classification match only when relevant terms has a secondary match. It's generally found within the proximity of that primary match. It's using proximity from the initial match to look at a number of characters before and after the data to match on another term. So in a structured data source like a database, that support term might be that column heading. So with that foundation set for an organization, you can elevate your data security risk posture through the enrichment of other tools such as DLP, CASB, SIMs, or identity and access management solutions. With the classification of the data in place, we can enrich a SIM, for example, with the classification. So imagine a world where your security operations center has the classification included in each of the logs they review, allowing the SOC to better prioritize their work. Prioritizing an issue that has been classified as highly sensitive, as opposed to working on an issue that is related to the public information, can be a game changer in preventing a breach or a mistake from becoming public. You can continue to take this concept even further to other protection mechanisms where you can ensure the right data has the right protection. I'd rather want to make sure that sensitive data like protected health information is encrypted or protected with a similar protection mechanism, whereas public data may only need access controls surrounding the data or require employees to access the information over VPN, as an example. This way you can manage the financial costs as well as the indirect costs of these different protection mechanisms to avoid interrupting the business's workflows. Or you can just use BigID, where these and other techniques are used, including machine learning, to drive an automated and evergreen classification that you can count on. Shelly, from your perspective, what are some of the byproducts data classification can provide to a business?
It's funny that you mentioned CASB. I used to work with the CASB and a DLP solution back in the day, so I can definitely see the benefit here of data discovery, understanding the data that's flowing through your environment. Also, giving you the ability to identify potential attack vectors for data exposure. Like you mentioned, identifying, internal data that really should not be shared in a public store. Or maybe you have an S3 bucket with overly permissive policies. All of these things could lead to a potential data breach. But you can also use this information for building out your DLP policies or building out policies for your CASB solution. So I think this is really critical, to make sure that you understand how your data is being accessed and used. And that's something that you get with data classification. So really, really awesome. That's good information. So, how would you say that data classification could be used for building out a foundation for your security strategy and other business operations?
Yeah, we've been dropping a few hints as we've been talking, kind of illustrating how data classification can become a competitive advantage for an organization. Data classification strategy is the gift that kind of keeps on giving. With data classification in place, you'll be able to help your organization understand the different vectors by which a bad actor may attempt to attack the organization. This is now an element of your cybersecurity strategy because you have coverage across your data estate in an automated and continuous manner. This will enable the security organization to prioritize the remediation of the risks to the business by focusing on the most sensitive data first. It will also allow you to meet compliance and regulatory requirements. Many industries are subject to data protection regulations such as GDPR or PCI, or just governance around personally identifiable information. Data classification can help businesses to demonstrate compliance with these regulations by showing that they've taken the necessary steps to protect that sensitive data. Another advantage of BigID is we have hundreds of out of the box policies like Hong Kong's Personal Data Ordinance or Alabama's Data Breach Notification Act, to name a couple, to get you started with complying with these regulations that impact your business. Data classification can also help you reduce costs across the business. We mentioned having the ability now to align the protection mechanism to the type of data. Maybe you're protecting the data that has been classified as public with encryption. There's a cost of using that heavy hand. With BigID, you're able to find duplicate, redundant, or obsolete data and where it's located, so you can take action on it and get rid of it. This not only helps reduce the attack surface, but there's a hard financial cost of holding on to that, especially if you're in the cloud, as most of the cloud offerings have a consumption-based model. This is also a common use case that BigID solves by helping organizations minimize their costs when moving from on-prem to the cloud, supporting that cloud migration plan. The list can go on and does go on, but by leveraging a data security posture management solution such as BigID's that provides a user workflow to focus on the risks with the highest criticality to the business and empowering the user, you can now take action. Businesses are enabled to resolve those vulnerabilities once and for all. So Shelly, I've been hearing a lot about Cohesity's data product. What is it, and how is data classification used within DataHawk?
That's a great question, Brian. So with Cohesity DataHawk, it uses data classification to help minimize data exposure. You can use it for improving security and helping understand the potential impact of an attack. In fact, DataHawk uses BigID for its data classification capability. So it's able to leverage those different classifiers. It's able to leverage the machine learning algorithms that BigID provides, giving you the ability to identify data at scale. So because of that built-in capability for reducing false positives, we're able to take advantage of that, giving you the ability to also leverage those different policies for GDPR, HIPAA, PCI DSS, depending on the industry that you're in. So gives you that data classification capability. It also integrates into a number of different third-party solutions. So if you need to have a specific workflow that you use when responding to a new event, it does have the capability to integrate into a number of our different data security partners. The other benefit is that it also gives you cyber vaulting capability, because for a lot of companies, you may be required to make sure that your data is immutable, meaning that it's in read-only format. And so the idea is that we want to make sure that we're protecting your backups from bad actors, which is something else that you also get with Cohesity DataHawk. So it gives you the data classification capability. It gives you cyber vaulting. It also gives you a rapid recovery, and then also the extended integration if you need to integrate it into a larger workflow within your organization. So I think that's really the key takeaway here is just making sure that you're providing yourself with the correct level of security. And so with DataHawk, it gives you that data classification capability. in addition with other things like threat intelligence, cyber vaulting, and rapid recovery. Brian, did you have any takeaways that you wanted to share with the audience related to
Yeah,
BigID or DataHawk?
yeah. So I think, just to kind of recap what we've been talking about, I think, everything starts with data classification as that foundational element in building, the so-called house around your cybersecurity strategy, and then showcase a number of different ways where you can actually grow that strategy to other things, and make sure that the tooling or the tool chain or the workflows that you have within your business incorporate data classification so that you're working smarter, not harder. You're managing the cost, especially in this macro environment that we're living in today. Cost is always, top of mind, and this allows you to be able to make sure that you've right-sized your protection mechanism to the kind of data that you have under, your custodian. So I think, it's the foundational element to helping, the CISOs and security professionals of the world and the data practitioners of the world to be able to set that foundation and then continue to elevate it over time to where you actually have a mature cybersecurity strategy.
No, that's awesome. This is great information, especially when you mention cost, because another good reason to track cost is that if you do see an uptick of activity within a particular region, it's important to also check and make sure that no one has access to your cloud account, from a security
100%.
perspective. So, now this is great information. I really appreciate your time, Brian, today. I think this is a really good, timely topic. For those of you that are interested in learning more about Cohesity, DataHawk, or BigID, you can always go out to cohesity.com. We have a landing page for Cohesity DataHawk. We've also done some blog posts around the partnership with BigID. And also, don't hesitate to go out to bigid.com because they do have some really awesome solutions out there, including the data classification capabilities with DataHawk. So I want to thank you for your time, Brian. This wraps up another episode of Cohesity Tech Insights. I want to thank everyone for watching. Take care, everyone.